So when we talk about collaboration, it's almost eminent for anybody that in order for things to work, there must be an ecosystem that needs to exist. The service providers and CICs are part of that ecosystem. But then the question is, what level of collaboration is necessary, and is there a collaboration that is going to happen on an ongoing basis? So if I have to put it in this way, are there going to be a need-based collaboration, or are there going to be a proactive collaboration? Right? At the end of the day, as Chandramouli pointed out, there is always this fear of loss of competitive advantage or loss of control between the service providers and the GICs, for the fact that both believe that they are working in each other's space. So that is where there is always a level of collaboration, but many times it could be at the arm's length. So you try to do more tactical-based collaboration. So the way how I put real collaboration is a way of working together to achieve a common goal for the parent organization. And that needs to happen without actually looking at day-to-day things. There is a service delivery-based mandate which require you to collaborate on a day-to-day basis, which is not really the true collaboration that will happen. So are there a joint, I would rather use the word go-to-market strategy, but when it comes to IT, it may not be a go-to-market strategy, but it is how to enable the go-to-market strategy through IT for the parent organization. So there is always that thing on the back burner of the people that are talking across the table between the service providers and the GIC. But at the end of the day, most large global corporations with multi-geo location companies, they have a need for different types of sourcing models. They need a captive, they need staff augmentation, they need an SLA-based model. And what are the areas where you can collaborate? What are the areas where you can leverage your internal versus the external ecosystem becomes a key component and a thought process of that collaboration. So I think to sum it up all, there is a need for collaboration, and what degree of collaboration is necessary at what level and how the framework should be set up is an interesting topic that it is really based on the need of that organization.
Thank you. And I want you guys to make notes so that we can ask questions later on, not just listen and then, maybe it's taken for granted, but you have an opportunity for Q&A, so I want you to make notes on specific questions that you have in this topic.
So Deutsche's experience in some respects has been quite varied, right? Naga actually started in DSL, so we've been through the gamut of running our own captive with no vendors, to having no captive with all vendors, and now falling somewhere in between, right? So, as with everything else, context matters, right? And so let's take it for granted, as Naga said, we are evolved enough and big enough where there's no one-size-fits-all model that's going to work, right? You need the diversity of optionality that you present, and there is absolutely no substitute for the ecosystem and the amplifier flows that you can have if you and the vendors work together, right? But if you don't and you compete, then you tend to cancel each other out, and you're not helping anyone in that respect, right? So for me, fundamentally, it comes down to actually the most fundamental of human behaviors, which is trust, right? If you trust each other, then a lot of good can happen. If you don't, then nothing good will come out of it.
Yeah, hi. Thank you. Is it working? Yeah. So I'm from Wipro, and all my life in Wipro. So as CM said, I think in Wipro, I have worked with several GICs and worked in both collaborative as well as in some situations in a competitive environment. And I thought I'll leave some thoughts in terms of what it takes to actually be collaborative and what it takes to be competitive as an opening thought. The first one is that to be collaborative, you need to have an extremely mature and evolved GIC, which is having an equal relationship with their principal, not an unequal relationship. So I think that has really turned out to be a successful partnership wherever we find GICs of that caliber. The second thing is that the GIC should be able to define and articulate its strategy of what it will do in-house and what it will do with external partners. I think that has also been very good in many of our engagements where we know what's coming 1 year down the line, 2 years down the line, and we are prepared for it. And the last one is there should be an inherent need for building an ecosystem, either because you're building certain platform skills or you're building certain pool of talent that you can leverage on a different context. So that should be the third criteria. And where it has failed typically has been either an unequal relationship that a GIC has with its principal, or where there is a sense of overwhelming sense of control that the GIC wants to have. In these two environments, we have not been successful in working in that with the GIC very well. So I thought I'll leave that, and I thank Zinnov for this platform, because this is an environment where I can probably speak out of what I really feel, irrespective of whether I'm a service provider or a GIC. So in all other contexts, it's more of a drama transaction.
Thank you. Now, from my perspective, very briefly, I used to work for a captive all my life. I've just moved, because the captive moved to Capgemini, I moved to Capgemini as well. So I give you a perspective which is very simple. When I started this Bayer captive, Bayer is a pharmaceuticals company. When I started this captive in Mumbai, 2005, whichever third party would come to me, I would just tell them to go away. I would say I do it on my own, because for me it was important that I build a big team under me. And I showed to my global CIO, I can have 100, 200, 300 people, because as soon as a third party, and a lot of them knocked my door, including Capgemini in those times, and I always told them, stay away, I will call you when I need you. That's what I did. And once we reached 300, and more requirements started coming in from the headquarters, I realized this is a lose-lose game. I am not able to meet up to the requirements. I am keeping the third parties away, and the headquarters says you can't ramp up people fast. And that's the first time that I got the first third party. And believe me, and this was pure SFDC, a small requirement that we had, gave it to a third party. They could deliver it so fast, under our control. I was extremely happy. So for me, primarily for two people to collaborate, it's the fear. The fear really has to go away. The fear in the mind of the GIC. And now that I'm Capgemini and I go to a GIC, I can see that fear very clearly. Can I have 4 Java programmers? Yeah, that you may talk about whatever conferences, whatever meetings. Finally, when the third party goes to the GIC, what is told is 4 .NET, 5 Java. Oh, do you have SAP? Give me some SAP. That's all. Because, and I can easily see that fear. I think people have to experience that on their own, that it is a win-win if we really collaborate well.
Thank you. So on that point, Arvind, you mentioned about maturity earlier, right? So how is fear and maturity correlated? Is that a factor which has to be first put onto the table, discussed on a level playing field, then you have to think about collaboration?
Yeah, I think it's interrelated in the sense that maturity and fear, maturity is the root cause and fear is the symptom really, because maturity comes with what the principal or how the principal sees the GIC as a center. So if the principal sees that it's just cutting cost and it's just moving work to a low cost center in India, Philippines or China, then obviously they would have the GIC ask for the business and ask for additional work, and it's very similar to a service provider selling to the direct principal, and that causes the fear. So the moment the principal says that the GIC is just another center, whether it's like I was giving you an example earlier in the telephone conversation we had, is that if it's whether you have a center in Santa Clara or in New Jersey or Portland or Bangalore, if you're in that mode, then I don't think the fear is going to be there, because people are the same everywhere, whether you're in the service provider or in the GIC. I think human beings are the same. So I would say that it depends on how the principal defines the GIC and how the GIC defines itself to the principal.
So Fazil, you have had an interesting journey. You ran your previous within DB. There was a lot of changes, and you talked about how changes at the top management and their thought process at an organization level can impact the partnership here, right? So you have an example of HCL, and then how you started your own center. Can you throw some light on that?
So at the end of the day, right, let's be clear, what the GIC can influence is a lot, but what it can control is actually very little, right? So depending on the tone at the top and the CIO at the top and their background and their experience with third-party providers, a lot changes, right? So we had instances of CIOs who wanted to keep it all in and instances of CIOs who wanted to throw it all out. And that dynamic always plays out, right? So, you focus on what you can control and absolutely influence together with a third party what you can. But I wouldn't sort of try to make a science of what is in someone's head around all of these things, right? So, to Arvind's point, I think in some respects there is a maturity curve, but beyond it, there are external extenuating factors, circumstances way above anyone's pay grade here that dictate some of these decisions.
Sure.
Right.
And just a quick point to add to that is that, to my previous point also is that we are always told, when I was a young sales chap in Wipro, so I was always told that if you ask 5 Java and 4 .NET, then why don't you go and ask what is the project? What do you want to really achieve? What's going to define your success? And that's what we were trained in Wipro for. I'm not sure if all GIC professionals are asking the same questions to their principal. So when the principal says that here is a bunch of things that I want to download, ramp up 300 people in this technology, are they really asking which organization function am I going to inherit and what value it's going to take, is going to deliver? Am I going to cut cycle time or am I going to cut costs, and in what proportion am I going to do that? So I don't know whether they're doing it because I've never worked it. Maybe Nagaraj can add to whether it's happening or not, but certainly that has to happen.
Yeah, I think it's a very good point. So when you set up a GIC, perhaps in the first few years of the evolution, it is the same situation as a service provider, right? So I want to get a few bodies to do the things, right? So that basically work as an extension model. So I've got a team here, I have a slack that I need to fill, so get me a few bodies. And I think that is the way how most GICs probably would have grown, because it is an extension model. In fact, if you look at Zinnov R&D maturity model, extension model is the first phase of the evolution, and then you go into the other evolutions as you get by. But I think most matured GICs who have been here for more than 5-6 years, they have taken a route. I'm not interested in giving you bodies. If you think that work can be done elsewhere, you do it. But tell me, how is it going to happen over the next 1 year or 2 years? So give me a long-term view of how this is going to evolve. And then we will put together a strategy, because for us, it is not possible to hire someone, just one resource for one group, and keep it that function running, because if there is an attrition, you have no way to fill it. So it has to be a strategy-based engagement. And I think most GICs that I have talked to have adopted it. Applied Materials, we do the same thing. In fact, we have done quite a bit of outsourcing. We have done a little bit of insourcing in a way where we call it a right sourcing. And many times we looked at it as an opportunity for our people to go above the plateau, right? So we're trying to create that global functional model, which means that if you have a leadership and talent anywhere in the world, you can actually create that functional leadership within that country. For example, I run global network services. I've got staff located in 6 countries that are directly under my management child, and that team supports about 160 sites worldwide. And that supports all of our remote access, network security, LAN, WAN infrastructure.
So, Nagaraj, one important question here, right? So, is the service provider part of that network of things?
Yes.
Are you treating all the teams as the same child, or do you have a step kind of a relationship with the service provider?
Yeah, so as I said in the beginning, we had multiple levels of engagement. As I said, a multi-geography, large organization have all kinds of models, and applied material has similar. So we have a captive, we have a staff augmentation, and SLA model. Right? So we do that in both IT infrastructure and application space. A lot of our service desk, our data center monitoring, our application support, all of them are in an SLA-based, outcome-based model. Right? So they are tagged to the penalty, they're tagged to a bundle, they're monitored through a set of parameters. And then we do a little bit of fixed bid projects that are specifically for areas of transformation where there is a defined scope of work. And then in cases where we can't really define, that is where we go to a staff augmentation. So staff augmentation is inevitable in many cases, so we might have to go back to situations of give me 2 SAP guys, give 3 Java people, or a project which is very small, which is part of a subsidiary activities related to a major project or whatever else. But if you're talking about a strategic project where we think that a service provider brings the value of his IP, their framework, their methodology of transition, methodology of transformation, that is where we try and engage on a fixed bid model.
Satul, on that point, there are 2 questions I have for you. The first one was, when you sold Bayer to Capgemini, what was the benefits that you saw? Of course, world is not always good. There are some challenges. We'll talk about that. What are the benefits? And you mentioned that people, growth, career aspects, artificial ceiling being broken was the important one. So I think that's a good point we need to bring out. The second one is, when you go and talk to a captive head today, what is that, if the the GIC is expecting value-based pitch, what is your pitch today?
Okay, I'll start with the first one. There were 550 of us who last October moved over to Capgemini. Now, one of the biggest problems that I had in my buyer setup was I was hiring people. These people were getting increments year on year. They were getting promotions because that's one way to retain people, especially in a small captive in Mumbai. And they were really becoming expensive. But I really had the kind of work that they were doing was still the same that they were doing probably 3 or 4 years back. So I was paying much more to people for the same kind of work. Because I had no other role to offer to them, they just continued to be with the captive. Once we moved over to Capgemini, I think the biggest advantage is the senior layer, the group team lead layer, and this was a pure IT captive. This entire layer moved off to different accounts. They were also getting frustrated doing routine work in the buyer account. So for Capgemini, they got some 60 experienced people who moved out to different accounts. And for buyer, the entire cost came down. So Capgemini could continue to do the same work with less skilled resources. So a big, big benefit to both. And this is where I see third parties and captives really working together. That was the first part. The second question?
What is a value-based pitch?
Right. Now, when I go to a captive, I mean, we can talk about all these theories, but when I now go to a captive and I could risk a guess, still there are 80% of them where, and I could be wrong, but this is my experience, who fear, and it's not about the size. I've gone to captives which are 2,000 people, and they still say they want to engage a third party in a staff augmentation mode. So give me 5, 10, 15 or something. So there is still that fear in them that they don't want to open up the project. So the first pitch, and I know it comes more by experience, the first pitch is sit down with the captive head and say, what can we both do together and co-create something which will help the parent. And I think if you strike a chord there, if you come up with 1 or 2 activities, that's when the captive head says, this is where I'm struggling, and can you come and pitch here and can be together, then do it. That's at least a pitch that I've been successful, not still very successful, in 2 or 3 captives, and I have a few people here who work with me who've been able to do that and move forward with the clients.
So I want to direct this question to Arvind. You have the whole framework of core, non-core, and then the maturity, right? So one thing you would all be surprised that I didn't start the conversation with cost, and any GIC versus a service provider discussion always begins with cost. We didn't do that. The reason being, we all know that cost arbitrage exists. Either you do it in-house or you do it with the service provider. Maybe the delta is slightly different. But really, in the end, if the value has to be created, you should move away from that dollar penny discussion, and you have to think beyond that. And that's what we are trying to evangelize here. With that, Arvind, I want you to talk about the commodity, where it gets commoditized, and where is the value created. The 3Ds.
Sure. So in our experience in Wipro has been that our customers, there are some customers who believe that Wipro has built certain value in terms of organization capability, people, processes, infrastructure, logistics, security, everything, and they take it as a whole. And then in those conversations we don't see the value being questioned, or at least the cost being the main conversation. It does come up at some point, but not the main conversation. But in many of the other captives, what we see is that the control, the layer, the stack of value that Wipro delivers or a service provider delivers is like at an execution level, we are able to execute, bring the right talent, and then at a control layer, they have a good, we have good control mechanisms, project management, program management, and then we have business vision and strategy and new technology transformation, which are different value stacks in the whole service provider ecosystem. And once the GIC starts dismantling this, saying that, okay, infrastructure, I'm going to set up my infrastructure which is compatible with mine. Process, you can use our process and our frameworks. And here is the program management office and a bunch of leaders and architects that we will provide. Now, where are the 5 Java guys or 50 Java guys or 500 Java guys? So the moment that comes, then it becomes a commoditized play. And what happens in the commoditized play is that it becomes a dollar game, which is $20, $18, $15, and I've even heard horror stories of 13 and 12 and 10. So once that happens, it's not all bad. Or maybe it's bad for a company like Wipro, but it's not all bad for everyone. But what happens in the longer term? You're not going to find a body shopper give the training and competency and skill building that is required in the latest and greatest technologies. You'll find companies like Infosys or HCL or Wipro or TCS or CTS doing that, but you won't find, or Capgemini for that matter, since you're here. Just kidding. So I'm just saying that, that's the kind of companies that are going to build the future for this IT industry. And if you dismantle the value completely, then you're really hurting yourself in the long term while satisfying yourself on a quarter by quarter basis. So that's one point I wanted to bring.
You talked about managed services being 90% of your work today, right? And what I take away from this conversation is when you start dismantling the value, you might win in the near term, but in the long term, there is definitely no value for either the service provider, neither the GIC. So what is your outlook on that? How did you go about it?
Painfully, right? So it's not like we decided up front this is the way we want to be, right? But as we evolve, right, we have, you can't have, he said it up front, is that there has to be a collective outcome, right? And you have to be clear about what that outcome is. And if you're not, then it doesn't help because you're going to get arbitraged anyway, right? So I think our initial view around what is the outcome for the engagement, right? What is the outcome for the overall project? Let's be clear about that. Right, and then when we bid it out, we are clear about the outcome and the role the provider has to play in delivering that outcome. And then together, we are accountable for the outcome back to the parent, right? So that's the way we have moved. That's the way we want to be. That does pose some challenges, right? But the benefit in some respects is that you do not have the overhead of figuring out who's your key man dependency, but is on the other side of the fence, right? But that being said, there's always a key man dependency on the other side of the fence. So you still have, you don't completely lose sight of that.
So Nagaraj, we were talking about core, non-core, and your example of what is core for IT can be different for engineering. Can you elaborate that framework for the benefit of the audience?
Yeah, so one of the big things about engaging and extracting value with service provider is really about what I go back to what our leadership talks about, right, in the semiconductor industry, right? So we always talk about identifying high value problems of our customers. So we can go and solve that world's toughest problem. In fact, our vision is we apply nano manufacturing technology to improve the way people live. It's a very bold statement. But how do we improve the way people live? Because we bring in transition in the marketplace. And that can only happen by understanding the high value problems of our customers. And IT, as an enabler of the business, is required to do the same thing. We have to go and solve the high value problems of our business unit that can go and get these things going and solve our customers' problems. And that is where, when there is a collaboration and the value that the service provider can come together and provide, that is when the collaboration can happen more smoothly and the embracement of the ideas happens very quickly. The other thing really is around the fact that Me Too type of services, right? So that is where it gets commoditized. The discussion is always going to be on dollars. People like to look at tier 3 vendors because they can do more arbitrage on the labor cost as opposed to engaging with tier 1 service providers. And then the whole concept of core versus context, it's always a moving target. What is core and context definition for someone is different than the understanding that somebody else will have. I mean, would you take your business as the epicenter of the core versus context, or whether you take it from the perspective of IT, what is core versus what is context for the IT organization? So for an IT organization, let us say, supporting our end users in the internal customer environment could be a core, because that is customer facing. As an organization, all customer facing activities are core. For an IT organization, customer facing activity, which is internal customer, is core. That could be your service desk, your desk side capability, right? But what we typically do is we outsource that first, because that is the thing that can be done faster, because it is a framework. It can be boxed very clearly. It can be done in a service provider environment, which is the most mature thing. But at the same time, let us say we do transformation activity. I talked about it earlier around the fact that if a service provider has an IP content or a framework, they could potentially charge us more per hour basis, but their effort is going to be substantially lower. So the overall cost of the project is actually lower than having us try to do it. In such a scenario, even though it is core, we don't have that niche skill, so we will go to the service provider. So that is where the question of, I say all core I will keep, all context I will outsource, won't happen. So in our case, we have in-sourced some of the things what we believe are context into the in-source environment. And in some cases where we believe are core are still in an outsourced engagement. Because if I am delivering a better value, in this case whether the cost is the value, of a sustaining activity, I would rather do it in-house. Because it is a repetitive thing, and year after year I am going to save money. Versus I am investing a little bit high dollar on a project resource that is going to provide a transformation capability for the company. As a CIO metric for any organization, if you look at it, you will see the continuous target of reduction in the run cost. Your success is measured based on how much are you going to reduce your run spend and shift that spend to build and transform. Right? So that is the real metric. And in cases where we have done a little bit of insourcing is really in the run space. Although many people may argue that run is actually a right candidate for outsourcing. Another thought that I would like to also talk about when you talk about managed services is really that we need to relook at the definition. In the past, what we used to call as managed services was really about what I call today as outtasking. You are outsourcing the professional services. And with the adoption of cloud, you are talking about outsourcing really means you don't do anything in-house. You outsource the software, you outsource the hardware, you outsource the entire computing infrastructure along with the support. That is really the true outsourcing. In fact, we have done significant shift. We had managed services providers that were managing our PeopleSoft infrastructure. Right? So a couple of years ago, we moved to Workday. And we saved about $7 to $8 million on a run rate per year. We worked together and we made a transformation in that context where we delivered a lot of that capability from India, but we also took certain portion of that activity from India to US to make it an overall winning deal for the organization by maintaining that sharp focus on the cost. And that was clearly an example of joint collaboration between the TIC and the service provider. But I think the answer is not very easy. In a multi-vendor scenario, it's always difficult. We're trying to crack that nut. I don't think we're successful yet. But we have created a vendor management office that takes care of our engineering and IT together. We're not yet there. Hopefully we will get as an executive council.
So before, I have a lot more questions to ask, right? So I wanted to know if you have questions in the audience. Okay, go ahead. Then I'll.
I think I'm quite audible.
Yeah.
I don't need a mic. I just want to get the perspective from the panel. What is that your view on co-innovation? Because we believe that what you can build locally can be consumed by the global market. But from that perspective, GIC and the service provider, how they can work on co-innovation? Is there a maturity that exists today or are we working towards?
So let me take a stab at it. In fact, there is little opportunity in our industry to co-create, but I think in general, when you look at the IT, I would look at IT in three levels, right? IT as a support, IT as a business enabler, and IT as a co-creator. And in industries like retail, banking, logistics, there are more opportunities to co-create value for IT. So for example, if you create a super internet banking platform, you could probably be acquiring more customers. And then if you move things very fast through an IT system, you could generate more value. And for a company like ours, which is a high cost but low transaction movement, right? So we make equipment that are very large enough, but we don't ship too much materials out of the door. We have very less opportunities. I mean, we have done, for example, a customer portal where people can order stuff, but it is very limited. So I think it depends on the type of industry that you work with. If you are trying to work with industries like ours, the co-innovation really from transforming from an end user and customer perspective is very limited, but you can create that co-innovation for improving the internal company's bottom line, like supply chain optimization, ERP transformation, and those kind of stuff. But I think in the banking, retail, and other, probably there is more opportunity. A good example would be, the Airtel and IBM relationship, right? So there is a revenue-based model, and they create value for Airtel that in turn is a revenue generation.
My take on that is that at the moment I think it's the maturity of both sides, both the service provider as well as the GIC is good enough only for very tiny and small micro innovation that is possible, in my opinion, and I may be mistaken because I have a limited set of customers that I can access, but primarily because the business model, there's a business model mismatch, because the service provider is there to make, as he delivers the service, get the revenue in, and the GIC is structured to deliver results more in a shorter term, and I say shorter term like 2 to 3 quarters or at most. So there is no long-term portfolio of innovation that is set up for the GIC in most cases, unless the really big guys have it. And in the service provider side, there is no incentive to invest when they know that there is no real portfolio of innovation that is there in the GIC. So it works better if there is a corporate R&D or a corporate CIO who's there in the principal, who's ready to give you the commitment, and then you can innovate with the principal. So that's my take.
If you are insecure about your position, that's the same with the service provider. If you are very greedy and you want to bypass the GIC, and as we talked about, Arvind talked about how the relationship and the trust matters, right? So the first thing is take out the fear and then see what is that trust you can build. And you need to be in an open mind to say that it's a win-win for both of us. It's like a VC investment. A VC comes in, he's taking a percentage out of the company, but the reason he's doing that is the overall pie is increasing. With the service providers and GICs together, can we increase the pie and can we benefit the company? The second learning I took away is at a company level. I think what is most important is people will change. It's beyond our control. There is always a initiative or a global level view that a lot of times service providers or JSC wouldn't have. But having said that, what is more important is to continuously align the value that can be generated from the partnership. Cost is definitely one of the value proposition, but that's not the only one. The third one as the industry is, I think we need to be smarter, and part of it comes to us as a consultants as well, right? When I talk to a client, I'll say, you know what, do India to India contract, you'll get it at $18. But in reality, that's not the right thing for us to do. If we have to have both of these ecosystem players coexist and deliver value and innovate, then we need to ensure that we talk about maturity and the value, and not about success and failure of one model versus the other. This is what I took away. I'm pretty sure you would have taken a lot more than what I understood. Thanks a lot.